Imagine discovering that an enemy army is approaching your city. You have information that could save thousands of lives. There is only one problem. You cannot call anyone. There is no phone, no internet, no radio, no text message. The only thing you have is a message and the hope that somehow someone can carry it far enough, fast enough. A guard seals the message.
A messenger takes it. He climbs onto his horse. The city gates open, and he disappears into the darkness. Every second matters, because somewhere ahead, people are waiting for information they don't even know is coming. But how did people send urgent messages before phones? For thousands of years, people kept finding ways to make important messages travel faster, farther, and more reliably. And that struggle would eventually transform the way the world communicated. When a message had to travel with a person, long before electricity, an urgent message usually had to travel with a person. One of the simplest methods was a runner. A messenger could carry a written message or sometimes memorize it and travel on foot to its destination. For short distances, this was practical, but the farther the message had to travel, the greater the risk. The messenger could become exhausted. A river could block the route. Bad weather could slow the journey. And during wartime, the messenger could be captured before the message ever arrived. So people began improving the system. Instead of asking one messenger to travel the entire distance, why not divide the journey? One messenger would carry the message to a particular point. Another would take over. Then another. The message kept moving while each individual messenger could rest. This basic idea became a powerful communication principle.
Speed came from the system, not just the messenger. One famous example came from the Persian Empire. Along important routes, royal couriers could use official stations where fresh horses were available. A rider did not have to depend on one exhausted horse for the entire journey. He could arrive, change horses, hand over the message, and continue. Ancient accounts describe the Persian Royal Road network as remarkably fast for its time, with messages able to cover enormous distances in a single day under favorable conditions. Imagine being the person waiting at the next station. You hear the horse before you see it. A rider arrives carrying news from far away. He hands over the sealed message. Another horse is already being prepared. There is barely time to ask what happened. The message is moving again. That was the real innovation. Not simply a faster rider, but a faster chain of movement. And then humans found another way to make that journey even more efficient. The horse. A mounted messenger could cover much greater distances than a person on foot. Across empires and kingdoms, horses became essential to long-distance courier networks. But even the fastest horse had a limit. The message still had to travel along the road, and people began searching for ways to reduce the amount of time it spent there. When the message took to the sky, one remarkable solution came from an animal that could travel without roads: the pigeon. Homing pigeons could be trained to return to a particular location. A small written message could be attached to the bird. Once released, the pigeon would fly back toward its home. It was a completely different kind of messenger. No road, no horse, no rider, just a bird crossing the landscape. But there was an important limitation. A pigeon could not simply be told to fly to any destination you wanted. Its usefulness depended on the bird's connection to its home location. That meant people had to plan the system in advance. Still, pigeons became valuable messengers in different periods of history, including later military communication. But pigeons were only one of many ways people tried to reduce the time a message spent on the road. What if you didn't need a messenger at all? What if people could send information using something that could be seen from far away? Light. Messages made of signals. Imagine standing on a hill and watching the horizon. A fire suddenly appears in the distance, then another, then another. The message is moving, not by horse, not by runner, but through a chain of signals.
Fire and other visible signals could be useful for simple warnings or alerts. They could communicate ideas such as danger, attack, or the need for help. But there was a limitation. A single fire could not carry a detailed letter. So humans began developing more sophisticated visual communication systems. Eventually, optical telegraphs appeared. These systems used visible structures or signals to represent coded information. An operator at one station would observe the signal from another station. He would reproduce it. The next operator would do the same. Station by station, the message moved across the landscape. Now, communication was becoming something more than transportation. It was becoming a network. But the system still depended on clear visibility. Fog could interfere, rain could interfere, darkness could interfere. Mountains and distance could create problems, and every signal still had to be observed and repeated by a human operator. Then came the breakthrough that changed the rules completely: electricity. When the message left the road, the telegraph transformed long-distance communication. Instead of transporting a physical letter from one city to another, information could be converted into electrical signals and sent through wires. Systems such as Morse code represented letters and numbers using combinations of dots and dashes. An operator could send the coded signal. Another operator at the other end could decode it. For the first time, the physical messenger was no longer required for the long-distance journey itself. The information could travel through the network. Think about what that meant for our urgent warning. At the beginning of our story, a rider had to cross dangerous roads to tell another city that an enemy army was approaching. Now imagine the same warning being converted into electrical signals. No horse had to carry it across the entire distance. No rider had to survive the journey. The information could move across enormous distances in a fraction of the time required by a physical messenger. Governments could communicate faster. Businesses could exchange information across distant cities. Newspapers could receive reports from faraway places. Military commanders could receive important information without waiting for a rider to arrive. Distance had not disappeared. But communication was no longer limited by the speed of a horse, and this changed people's relationship with time. A message that once belonged to the road now belonged to the network. But there was still one thing electricity had not yet delivered: the human voice. When people could hear each other, the telephone brought another extraordinary change. The goal was no longer simply to transmit symbols representing words. It was to transmit the sound of a person's voice. Now, communication could become much more direct. Instead of writing a message, instead of encoding dots and dashes, instead of waiting for a courier, a person could speak, and someone far away could hear. The journey that had begun with a runner carrying a message had entered an entirely different age. The physical messenger had finally disappeared from the long-distance communication process. Information no longer had to travel at the speed of a human body. It could move through networks, and those networks continued to grow. Eventually, communication crossed oceans, then continents, and later, digital networks connected billions of people. The journey of one urgent message now returned to the warning from the beginning. An enemy army is approaching. The first messenger runs, then a horse takes over. At the next station, another fresh horse is waiting. The message continues. Cut. A pigeon rises into the sky. Cut. A signal appears on a distant tower. Another station responds. Cut. A telegraph operator sits beside his machine. Dots. Dashes. The message travels through wires. Cut. A telephone rings. A voice delivers the warning. And finally, a smartphone. A few words are typed. One tap. Sent. The entire history of communication flashes before us. Runner, horse, pigeon, signal, telegraph, telephone, smartphone. The technology kept changing. The systems became faster. The distances became smaller, but the reason remained the same. Someone, somewhere, had something important to say, and they needed another human being to hear it. Today, sending an urgent message feels almost effortless. We type a few words, press send, and expect the message to arrive within seconds. But behind that simple action is a story that stretches across thousands of years. People ran across roads carrying news. Riders crossed empires. Couriers changed horses at distant stations. Pigeons carried tiny messages through the sky. Signal towers passed information from one operator to another. Telegraph wires carried coded signals across enormous distances, and the telephone allowed voices to cross those distances. Each generation solved the same problem in a different way. How do we make important information travel faster? How do we make it travel farther? And how do we make sure it arrives before it is too late? The history of communication was never really about phones. It was about one timeless human desire: to defeat distance. To make sure that when something mattered, the message could get there before it was too late. The technology changed. The roads disappeared. The horses became unnecessary. The wires became invisible. And eventually, the entire world became connected by devices small enough to fit inside a hand. But the human need never changed. We have always wanted our words to reach someone. The only thing that changed was how fast they could get there. Fade to black. The message got faster. The human need never changed.